operation of an AT&T Mobility wireless cellular communication tower at Blossom Music Center at 1145 West Steeles Corners Road and declaring an emergency. Mr. Paul, is it you that would be speaking, or Mr. Guerra? Go for it. West Steeles Corners Road and declaring an emergency. Mr.
Okay, good evening. Thank you, everyone. My name is Adam Paul. I'm the senior planner for the city. As stated here, I'll review our file for the proposed cell towers, basically what this comes down to. And thank you to everybody for joining and your patience. Thank you to the applicant again for patiently waiting and working with us over a long course of time in this case. If you don't mind, I'll go ahead and share my screen so that you can follow along with me as I review the summary I provided to council this evening.
Go right ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so as stated, the request is to construct a monopole wireless telecommunications facility. A cell tower requires a conditional zoning certificate anywhere in the city. They have had this same area in use with a temporary type of tower, what's called a cell on wheels or a COW. And it's within the same location. They already have it fenced. It's adjacent to a hard surface parking lot that is in the northwest corner of the site, for which I provided a couple overview photos. Just to recap, the Planning Commission at their May 19th, 2020 meeting recommended approval of the conditional zoning certificate for this project. The tower would be 70 feet high. There's some associated equipment with that would be installed within the same area. And as stated per chapter 1135 of our general development code, wireless communication facilities, the use requires a conditional zoning certificate. So one of the stipulations that was agreed to and recommended by the Planning Commission is that they maintain those standards, of course, and that the proposed development stays consistent with the file and the findings found therein. The second stipulation that approval subject to conditions as stated in letter of recommendation from Center for Municipal Solutions dated March 10th, 2020. And what we're referring to there is the fact that our code allows the city to use an outside consultant with expertise and a more detailed analysis to go through some of the structural federal code and safety requirements surrounding this kind of use. And that was very thoroughly vetted by Richard Comey and his staff with the Center for Municipal Solutions. And the applicant representative, Ed Block from GPD Group, has been working diligently with them in the meantime. And it's our understanding they've already met all the criterion that was recommended in that letter. And then the third stipulation recommended by the Planning Commission is that the area be fully enclosed and screened to meet our minimum standards for landscape and screening. And that, of course, requires submission of a bond in the amount of 50% of those costs. I did state that there is currently a 6-foot wood fence surrounding that area. I think they're inclined, the property owners there at Blossom Music Center, to upgrade or improve that just as this new work comes in. And so that in general is the summary of the project. I'll show you an overview of the parcel here. Obviously a very big site. If you can see my cursor here, this is the amphitheater, and this large yellow arrow is pointing to the area where they're requesting and have gotten Planning Commission approval pending council decision to construct this permanent tower. It's been in use for some time on a temporary basis. This will make it a more suitable type of cell tower for their customers. And then this is just a little closer view, the second image here that shows you, I can zoom on that a little. You see that there is the actual temporary tower. That's the fenced area around it. This is the parking lot. So I'll pan back out and you can see where that is in relation to the amphitheater and the fact that they need this to service their customers during events. So I'll go ahead and stop my screen sharing now, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. I appreciate the synopsis there. Is there any one of the developer that here that needs to speak or would like to?
This is Ed Block with GPD. I'm just attending to answer any questions. As Mr. Paul stated, that there had been a pretty extensive review by Mr. Comey, and we ended up complying with all the items that were requested. One of the things that the new tower will provide is it's structurally capable of actually accommodating 3 other levels of antennas. It's a relatively short tower, so that may not happen, but we do know that there's actually another carrier interested in putting something up. They were looking at doing something temporary last year. So this tower will accommodate their antennas as well. And there's enough ground space around that for their ground equipment. It's just an added benefit, I guess, from that standpoint. Eliminates additional towers.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Block. I do know from the Planning Commission, there really wasn't too much discussion from it because everything, all the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted. It's not very intrusive when it comes to the size of it and, you know, getting in people's way or anything like that. I have no further questions. I am going to turn that over to see if the committee has any questions. Ms. Nichols Rhodes.
Adam, I will ask you, how tall is the current temporary tower?
Same height, 70 feet.
Okay, thank you. And then the footprint, will it keep that same footprint that we saw?
Yes, the enclosure, currently the temporary tower actually is supported by some guy wires. So they extend out a little bit farther than the new tower is a monopole self-supporting, so it won't have any guy wires in it. So actually the footprint for both AT&T's equipment as well as the tower is less than what the current temporary one is.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Block. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols Rhodes. Mr. Miller, do you have anything?
I do not.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to questions or comments from council. Unfortunately, I can't see everybody. I can only see who's speaking. So if you'd like to identify yourself, and then I can okay for you to comment. Is there any comments from council? Okay. Ms. Colavecchio, do you have any kind of correspondence, emails, questions, or concerns from the public?
I do not, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Well, with that then, I will ask to bring this out with a favorable recommendation for a vote next week. Do I have a vote, please?
So moved.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All those in favor of bringing out temporary ordinance A27 signify by saying yes.
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 The vote was unanimous. We will bring out temporary ordinance A27 for a vote next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Temporary ordinance A28 presented by the administration upon recommendation of the Planning Commission. An ordinance authorizing and approving the final subdivision plat and improvement plans for the towns at Steele's Corners on parcels 35-03697 and 35-03632 and declaring an emergency. Mr. Paul.
Again, thank you, sir. Again, here I'd like to thank our applicants for their patience and the work and investment that they've made to date in getting this project along through the city. There has been a good deal of work on it, and rightfully so. It's going to be, you know, the improved standards for what we would require for townhomes there, and they've done, you know, a lot of engineering on a difficult site and had some additional issues and conditions to work through. And so the project should look familiar to council. A small portion of it was included in a zoning map amendment, and that was to accommodate additional buffer and setback area from the extreme conditions, particularly of wetlands, to the east of the main project site here. Following that, then they came through with the plans for the preliminary plat, which were reviewed and approved through Planning Commission and Council. And now here we are at the final plat stage. So we're just following the process, getting to the point where you may see some things get finalized here and the ability to move forward on the project. So again, here, if I can share my screen, I'll go through this summary that I provided to council this evening and review the project with you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Okay. Cuyahoga Lake Land, or excuse me, I've said that each time I think, but it's Cuyahoga Land Partners, LLC. They have applied for the final plat. Again, this consists of 46 single-family attached dwellings. These are townhomes clustered into 8 buildings. The project area is 9.3 acres of that site. Owned by SC Acreage LLC, and the applicant's representative that's done much of the work to this point is Woland Engineering Group. Mike Woland is with us here this evening, as well as Mr. Rice and Mr. Karam. The Planning Commission recommendations. This too was heard at the May 19th Planning Commission meeting. They recommended approval of the Towns at Steeles Corners final subdivision plat and improvement plans. We've been through a good deal of review through the engineering department already, and some back and forth working with the developer to get it up to the appropriate code standard and hopefully meet them at a point that it still works well. Based on the final plat's consistency with the approved preliminary plat, again, just following our steps, and the principles from several stages of long-range planning documents in our current code, the Planning Commission moved to approve with the following stipulations. Some of these were just carryovers from the previous, the preliminary plat. And so some of them are also things that are just looked at a code level when we see, something come through for an approval stage. One stipulation that all streets meet city construction standards. 2, an improvement plan revision to include a recommended street tree from one of our lists. 3, vehicular and pedestrian connection to Cuyahoga Lake Road from the subdivision must be established by the developer to planning and engineering standards. Any required off-site improvements at the developer expense. And number 4, that a $1,200 fee in lieu of dedication be paid per dwelling per 1124.05D to be used for vehicular and pedestrian access or open space improvements for this development. And the amount can be increased as needed for costs. And we'll get into a little bit of discussion about that momentarily. Number 5, all housing finished materials be designed with 50% of front facades. That must include natural color, brick veneer, stone, or cast stone. All siding shall be cement fiberboard or premium vinyl siding. Coach garage doors with windows shall be used. Number 6, that a heavy screen meeting our standards, which they've already provided. It's on the plans as modified by the Planning Commission to allow a solid vinyl fence along with the landscaping they show there, that be used to buffer the mixed-use commercial area adjacent to the proposed site. And that's shown on their plans. Number 7, development of former sublot 13 shall meet residential rear access lane standards as described in the 1122.07D of the Cuyahoga Falls General Development Code. Number 8, declaration of covenants, conditions, restrictions, and reservation of the easements shall be provided for city review and approval prior to filing of the final plat with the county. And number 9, that the alley roadway shall be designed to the highest pedestrian and vehicular standards. And number 9 was somewhat of an addition from our Planning Commission just to ensure that we're taking into account the hopeful benefit of pedestrians to be able to use this area on foot as well as for vehicular ingress egress. I'll speak about that for just a moment now because that was one of the main talking points really and one of the things that the commission has come up with and the developer has been working a lot on to get a resolution to, and that concerns where there was formerly a lot that would have had a townhome on it in this area has been swapped out for another area on the site to allow for this area here to be improved per our conditions to a residential rear access lane standard with the hopes that they can acquire an access easement that currently exists on the adjacent properties over here for emergency ingress egress to allow some passage for these residents out to Cuyahoga Lake Road. My understanding is that that was always intention of future development when the commercial development in the mixed use area went in, that there be some access provided there. What our conditions state are just basically that so long as they can acquire access and alleviate concerns that the engineering department had in terms of the potential traffic and safety impact there, there won't be need for further study or to do any additional public improvement on something like, say, Steele's Corners Road. So they've been working with the other private property owners to acquire that. That part of this development is in flux at the moment. They can speak to that probably in a little better detail than me, but I think we feel good about the fact that they're hopeful to get this area improved on it from their site and have an emergency means, a secondary means of ingress egress there, as you heard at the Planning Commission meeting. And so with that, I will go ahead and stop the screen share and I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have from me.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. I don't have any questions. I'm glad that you brought up stipulation 9 and went into detail about that, because that was kind of a sticky point there when it came to the Planning Commission. That, along with the protection, of course, of the wetlands was another major concern, but both items have been satisfactorily taken care of. And I really don't have any other questions for myself. I was wondering if Mr. Wallen or Mr. Rice or Mr. Karen would have anything to say. I can't see you, so if you don't have anything to say, just say no.
No, this is Mr. Rice. No, nothing to say. We're looking forward to getting this project moving. It's been a long process and we feel really good about it. We're just excited to go.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Rice. Appreciate it. Anything else from anybody else?
This is Mike Wool. And I'm just happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, very good. I don't have any questions right now, so I guess if Mr. Karam doesn't have anything to say,
No,
I
sir.
will.
Thank you, though.
Okay, Danny. I will ask if Ms. Nichols Rhodes or Mr. Miller has anything to say.
No.
I have a question, Mr. Chair. May I direct it to Mr. Paul?
You sure can.
Mr. Paul, did we conduct a traffic impact study?
That's a good question. It was initially brought up prior to looking at the preliminary plat. And what happened was a trip generator was done. So the trip count was provided and gave them indication that they wouldn't need further study beyond that. They were ready to move forward, according to Mr. Rice from our last Planning Commission meeting, with the traffic impact study, but we're advised that due to the current conditions from the lockdown and the lack of traverse, that it wouldn't be reflective of real world results right now. And so, you know, while the full impact study hasn't been conducted, we still want to be mindful of what the city engineer was looking at with concern to that, and the fact that we felt that there was past implication from having that access lane available to Cuyahoga Lake Road. And so without going through the traffic impact study, they did also already agree and have engaged the private property owners to work on use of the easement. And so that's where that stands as of now. I think that they would, if it proves necessary. That's why we've kind of held those conditions in there, that we want to be sure that it's going to be safe and we understand the full impact. And so if they're unable to get access in a way that seems suitable to alleviate those concerns, we may have to go forward with the full impact study.
Okay, understood. I appreciate that. And I just had another question regarding the heavy screen to the west.
Okay.
Were there any discussions relative to the business that's right there? I know they have an outdoor concert venue that they use. Was that brought up in any of the discussions as far as the noise?
It has been. It was certainly brought up at our first Planning Commission meeting regarding this project, and rightfully so. And we engaged Wings Warehouse internally with the city after that and reviewed the conditional zoning that allowed that outbuilding and what its intended use was for, what the expectations from the city were in terms of how it gets used going forward. and what the screening requirements that should be in place for it are. I'd say separate of that, the applicant in this case is doing what's been asked of them in terms of the screening and buffering from that. Now, we would have liked, and that was discussed at the planning commission meeting as well, to see if they could push the road eastward, but it's very restrictive over there. If you look at, and this even goes back to initial documents provided by Mr. Wolland, if you look at the setback areas over there, really it's difficult to do, particularly when you've got attached units. It's hard to even put like a curvature into the road there because that affects how many you can get into the footprint of the building with the townhomes. So definitely aware of past and recent concerns from the noise levels there and taking into account how we can help alleviate that.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Those are all the questions I had, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I'll turn it over to council then and see if there's any questions. Please identify yourself if you have questions.
Hey, Jerry, this is Tim. I had a question.
Go right ahead.
Stipulation number 4, Mr. Paul had stated that we'd go back and talk about that. That's the $1,200 in lieu of dedication. And then the last sentence is that it can be increased as needed. Can that be expanded upon?
Sure. Thanks for bringing that up. And again, most of that is tied to where we had them swap out sublot 13, which would have had a townhome on it. They were able to pick up another unit at the front of the site to do so. And what we're talking about there is the ability to use the in lieu of dedication fee. So much of the rest of the site would be unusable really as community space or park space, that in lieu of dedicating that to the city, they can have the per dwelling unit fee paid, and those can be used towards improvement and access over there to alleviate the traffic concerns.
What would cause or what entity would cause that amount to be increased?
I think
How
that
would
would be, I think that beyond what is required by our code and stipulated in the planning commission approval, beyond that, it would be an arrangement between the home builder and prospective buyers if they established a new fee to go beyond that.
Okay, so is the city concerned about that fee? And are we going to enact or be concerned about any additional regulations we may need to put on this site moving forward, where we would expect more money to be expended in certain areas? I guess I'm trying to find out exactly if the city bears any responsibility moving forward with that subjective fee increase.
I think the reason it's in there in the way it is that we're not entirely certain of what the cost would be at this point. And that much of that is going to be dependent on whatever's established with the developer and the private owners of the access easement. But the in lieu of dedication fee is a requirement of the city. So do we have concerns about the need to increase that fee anymore? I don't think the responsibility there is the city's.
Okay, I guess that's my question. You're
Right.
you're satisfied with stipulation number 4 as it's written?
Yeah, I don't think that the intent is for us to go back and state it anymore. It's that if they wish to pass additional cost on as needed to new buyers there, that would be an agreement that they'd make in the private real estate realm.
Okay, very good. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I have.
You're muted, sir.
Hey, Jerry, you're on mute.
How about now? Thanks. Thanks, Tim. Are there any other questions or concerns from council or the administration? Okay. Ms. Colavecchio, are there any emails, correspondence, questions, concerns from the public?
None that I have received, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Well, then we will ask for a motion and a second to bring out temporary ordinance 828 for a vote next week.
So moved.
Second,
There's been a motion and a second. All those in favor of bringing out temporary ordinance 828 for a vote next week signify by saying yes.
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 The vote was unanimous. And we will bring out temporary ordinance 828 for a vote next week. And if there is no other questions or concerns, the Planning and Zoning Committee is adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening.
Thank you.
It's 6:55, and I'd like to call the Finance Committee meeting to order. Misters Rice, Karam, and Woolen, you're welcome to stay and listen, or you're welcome to carry on with your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Temporary ordinance 829 presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts without competitive bidding with Thompson Electric, JF Electric Inc., Highdaker Wheat Lake Company, Vaughn Industries, and Kent Power for make-ready work in connection with small cell wireless 5G technology and declaring an emergency. I'm going to ask the question first that Jerry's been asking last, so I don't forget. Have we received any communications from any residents regarding this issue? And that's to whomever may have received it. Okay, I'm hearing none. So, Mr. Doherty, I see that you're joining your first council meeting via Zoom. Is that because you'd like to speak to this ordinance?
Yes, that's the case. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Yeah, we do have a number of antennas that Verizon wishes to install in the city, and most of them on utility poles, some of them on traffic poles, and so there's a lot of work, make-ready work for these antennas, and so we didn't know when the budget season started that we were going to need to do all this work, and we've got enough of our own work, so we want to get all this make-ready work done by contractors, increase the budgets so that can happen. Now, all the make-ready work is being paid for by Verizon through GPD. GPD is kind of like the in-between. They're the ones engineering it, and then they get checks from Verizon, and then they cut checks to us, and we take the money from them before we will authorize a PO. So we'll be made whole 100%, but this is just so a contractor can do the work, and we're not limited by the $50,000. It's going to be above that for some contractors, and we can get this work done and not impede the progress of getting these antennas installed in the city.
Okay, very good. I appreciate you explaining the money, because when you talk about increasing non-budgetary items, especially during times like this with our struggles, it raises some eyebrows. So I'm glad to know that we'll actually be made whole, as you said, before the work is commenced. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, very good. This 5G tower, is this the contract, Ms. Ciotolo, that you had worked, maybe not the specific contract, but you had worked very hard on a plan for wireless in the city. Is this part of that plan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Very good. Okay. And you're comfortable as a law director with this piece of legislation?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Very good.
I think it handles the work that we need to be done to ensure that this that construction is done according to all applicable state, federal, and local standards. And also we are getting reimbursed, or they're paying the costs up front before the work begins, and it ensures that our financial records are appropriate as well.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Doherty. I don't have any further questions. Does anybody from the Finance Committee have a question or a comment?
No.
No. Okay, what about council? Does anybody from council have a question or comment? I see Ms. Nichols-Rhodes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This also, just before we began our meeting, I had received an email from a constituent with concerns about health issues related to 5G. And I just wanted to, going back probably 2 or 3 years ago, Ms. Ciotolo and I met with a constituent and really looked into his concerns. And have discovered that there are FAA regulations. And then since that time, Ms. Ciotola has worked on a comprehensive piece of legislation to ensure safety and proper procedures of these companies. I'm glad to just know who they are, because I think in the beginning of these 5G installations, they would go up and the city was not aware. So I think that this was something that's been very well prepared for. And so thank you, Ms. Ciotola, for your work on this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your comments. I appreciate that. Adam, did you start to put your hand up? Did you have a question?
I did.
Okay.
Yes, may I address Mr. Doherty?
Yeah, please.
Mr. Doherty, I just had a question regarding the make ready work. This is going to be on existing telephone poles. It's not going to be adding. I guess my question is, in part of my ward, a lot of the electrical work is underground. So will you be adding any type of small cell technology to existing light poles? Or are these going to be just the telephone poles?
It'll be in various structures. It's going to be on existing utility poles. There will be a lot of poles replaced with taller poles for this work. That's what part of the make ready work is for. In areas where there's underground utilities, what would happen is where they want to put an antenna, it would take out an existing light, street light, post top street light, and put in a taller structure there, have a street light there, but the antenna would be at the top of it. And then there's some antennas that are going to be on traffic signal poles. So that's the plan, to get these antennas where they need to be. The signal doesn't travel very far, so they need to get them in particular areas. And we're trying to get, work with them to get them in the areas that work with us being able to supply them power, because they need power from our system in order to operate.
How many of these antennas are they going to install throughout the city? Do you have an idea?
It's right around 150.
Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Miller, for the question and the comments. Are there any other questions or comments from anybody on council? No? Okay. Very good. Is there a motion to bring out temporary ordinance 829 for a vote next week?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We'll vote on 829 next week at our council meeting, and that concludes the Finance Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, it is 7:03, and I'll now call to order the Public and Industrial Improvements Committee. We don't have any minutes to go over tonight. So our business is temporary ordinance 830, an ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for the repair and reconstruction of concrete pavement at various locations in the city and declaring an emergency. And Mr. Demasi earlier had cleared up for me that these are not streets. These are other areas that need to be repaired. Mr. Demasi, if you don't mind, just let everybody know what this is going to pay for.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So this year with our concrete program, we'll be doing a couple big projects. First one is the replacement of the Manchester Court parking lot. If anybody doesn't know where that's at, Manchester Court is a small little parking lot. If you can imagine where Hope Soap is, it's behind Hope Soap. You access it just to the west of the restaurant there at the corner of Portage Trail and Front Street. And there's a retaining wall in there as well. And so that parking lot will be replaced. That project has already been bid. We'll also be building across the street a new area on the south side of Portage Trail on city-owned property next to Metropolis. that can be used by the downtown businesses for trash dumpster purposes. This is actually a good problem to have in the downtown. We have businesses coming and they need a place for their dumpsters. And so this was a good coordinated project. That project is out to bid right now. It's called the Portage Trail Service Access Drive. If you happen to go on our website, you'll see it listed on the project bidding page. And the project the bids will be opened up next week. Both of those projects will start in early July, and they should be complete by the end of August. With any money left over in the program, and we should have some, we'll look at doing some spot repairs across the city and other concrete areas. For example, we know that we have some areas of Howe Avenue east of Barney's that need some repairs out there. So we'll be taking a close look at repairing those. And then there's also just various other concrete streets that we can go in and do some spot repairs as well.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Demasi. Does anyone on the Public Improvements Committee have any questions for Mr. Demasi?
Yeah, Mary?
Yes.
Yes, this is Jeff. And I'd like to ask Tony one question, if that'd be all right.
Yes,
Tony, in the south side of Front and Portage, where we're going to have the dumpsters or whatever, will that be basically all hidden though? So when people do drive down Portage Trail, they aren't going to see that Cuyahoga Falls has 10 dumpsters?
Yeah, it'll be hidden. It'll be fenced off. We had it designed by Environmental Design Group, who, as everybody is aware, is very cognizant of how their projects look. So it'll look nice and landscaped.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any members of council have any questions or comments? And Ms. Iatola or Ms. Colavecchio, have either of you received any comments from the public?
No, not on any of these projects from the public. I could say though that I'm in constant communication with our partners downtown, and they're very anxious to have the upgrades to the access road so that they can deal with the many trash cans that you see lined up there against Metropolis on a daily basis. And the business owners behind Manchester Court understand that this is going to be a grave inconvenience for a while. Some of them have tenants parking back there, but they know that this is coming. They've known this is coming. And they also realize it's going to be a great improvement once it's completed.
Thank you, Ms. Colavecchio. Any other comments? All right, then I'd like to entertain a motion to bring temporary ordinance A30 out of committee for a vote next week.
So moved.
Frank, you're muted, I think. Second. All those, oh, there he is. I'm sorry, thank you. Frank Sam seconded. All right, so to the committee, all those in favor of this ordinance going forward next week for a vote, please say yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Frank, you're muted again.
Yes, Frank. Frank.
Mr. Stams? Well, currently the vote is 2-0. Motion carries to bring this out of committee next week for a vote. Thank you. That concludes the Public and Industrial Improvements Committee.
It is 7:09 in the community development. I inadvertently scheduled a meeting for today, but please take note, we do have legislation, but we have a public hearing for A31 on July 6th. So again, July 6th, we'll have our public hearing, and then after that, we'll have the committee meeting to discuss temporary ordinance A31. And that is it for community development.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Tim.
Good night, everybody.
You're welcome.
Okay, bye. Good evening.
Bye.
Bye.